My name cut through the ceremony hall like a clean crack of glass, sharp enough to make me straighten my shoulders as I walked across the stage. The lights were too bright, the applause too loud, but none of that mattered. What mattered were the seats, 8 of them, lined neatly in the family section, each marked with a small card printed with my last name. I had seen them hours earlier when the ushers were setting up, and a small part of me dared to imagine they'd be filled when my moment came. But when I stepped onto that stage, diploma folder in hand, the row stared back at me like a hollowed-out memory. Empty chairs. Untouched programs. Nothing but blank space where faces should have been, faces I had spent my whole life trying to impress, soothe, appease, or simply be noticed by. Everyone else's families erupted, shouts, whistles, phones in the air. Mine was silent. My own laugh escaped, small and clipped, the kind you use when you walk into a joke you weren't told was about you. I just kept moving because stopping would have made it worse. 8 months passed after that day. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a lazy thumbs-up emoji. I worked. I hustled. I learned to stop expecting anything from the people who once taught me to expect everything from myself. And then, as if on cue from a universe, with a cruel sense of timing, my name appeared in a real estate headline, my tiny renovation that ballooned into a multi-million-dollar penthouse project. Suddenly, silence cracked. A message from my father. For words, nothing more. Family dinner. 6 p.m. And the kicker, important discussion. No, proud of you. No, we're sorry we missed it. Just a summons like I was a contractor they needed to negotiate with. I said yes anyway. But not for them. More for the version of me who once would have done anything to be seen. My name is Nora Hale, and for most of my life I learned to shrink myself so others could stretch as wide as they wanted. I wasn't told to be quiet. I simply existed in the spaces left behind. My family didn't ask me to become the reliable one, the fixer, the steady pair of hands. I just became her. Out of habit. Out of survival. Elena, my older sister, was the golden one, the mind everyone boasted about. Ryan, the youngest, was the fragile one, the kid shielded even from the consequences he created. And then there was me, the glue, the filler, the afterthought. The signs showed early. Like the day Elena forgot her science project and burst into tears on the doorstep. My mother reacted like the house was on fire. Without being asked, I offered her mine. She took it. Elena won a ribbon. No one wondered why I turned in nothing that day. Mom simply patted my shoulder and said, "Nora always figures things out," as if that were affection instead of erasure. That wasn't an isolated moment. That was the blueprint. And the blueprint never changed. What I didn't know then, standing on that stage staring at 8 empty chairs, was that the next lesson my family would teach me wouldn't be about being overlooked. It would be about what happens when you finally stop letting people step over the space you learned to survive in. Growing up in the Hale household meant learning the roles no one admitted existed. They weren't listed on a chart, and no one announced them at dinner, but they were as rigid as carved stone. Elena, 2 years older, lived in a spotlight she didn't even have to switch on. It just followed her. Teachers adored her, relatives bragged about her, and even the cashier at the corner market once slipped her a free muffin for being such a bright young lady. Ryan, 5 years younger, was the baby, the boy no one expected anything from except to be charming, which he excelled at. A scraped knee or a forgotten assignment became a family emergency if it involved him. And me? I learned to occupy the negative space, the quiet in-between, the steady rhythm, the hands that picked up what others dropped. I wasn't the golden child or the baby. I was the buffer. One memory I can never erase happened when I was around 14. I had saved nearly every penny for my first part-time job at the craft store down the road. After weeks of debating, I finally bought a set of professional drafting tools, a small kit, but beautiful. Precision rulers, metal compasses, a sketching knife in a velvet sheath. It was my first real step toward a dream I barely dared to name, designing spaces that made sense, unlike the emotional architecture I grew up in. The tool sat on my bed for all of 2 hours before my father knocked on my door. "Nora, sweetheart, Your sister ran into a little trouble with one of her credit cards, he said, not even making eye contact as he spoke. She forgot a bill, and the late fee hit harder than expected. Could I borrow that money you saved? He didn't wait for my answer. He didn't even look at the unopened box. He just pocketed the cash like the matter was already settled. You're responsible, he said with a smile that felt rehearsed. Elena has such a kind heart. She just needs a little more time. I nodded because arguing wasn't part of my assigned character. Birthdays played out the same way. One year, I baked a cake from scratch, layers of chocolate, cooled carefully so the frosting wouldn't melt. I decorated it with small sugar flowers because my mother loved that kind of detail. But when Elena waltzed in late with a box of store-bought cookies, Mom all but cried with pride. You're always so thoughtful, she said, kissing her cheek. My cake? Cut, served, forgotten. I realized then that invisibility doesn't always feel like nothing. It can feel like being erased in real time. But the moment that cemented everything came years later in the cramped studio apartment I could barely afford after moving out. It was winter, bitter enough that you could see your breath indoors. I was wrapped in 2 jackets, hunched over my wobbly desk, working on a renovation layout that might have been my first real break. Rent reminders blinked on my phone like warning lights. On a whim, or maybe desperation, I called my father. Not for money, just advice. Just his voice. He answered, but instead of comfort, I got the familiar chill. Real estate is cutthroat, he said. Leave that to people who understand the numbers. You should aim for something safer. Then, he hung up. No goodbye. No pause. No chance to reply. That night, the seam of my old portfolio ripped open. I didn't throw it out. I sewed it shut with trembling fingers under the weak glow of my desk lamp. That crooked stitch would follow me through every milestone afterward. It shouldn't have surprised me that they missed my graduation. Not after everything before it. But understanding doesn't soften the blow. 8 months after that empty row, my life changed, and my family finally remembered my name. But not for the reasons they should have. 8 quiet months slipped by after graduation, each one cleaner and calmer than anything that came before. I didn't reach out, and neither did they. It wasn't bitterness that kept me away, it was clarity. I finally understood the difference between being needed and being valued. And for the first time in my life, I chose silence. I threw myself into work instead. If there was a project I could take, I took it. If there was a building everyone else overlooked, I inspected it twice. I bought tools secondhand, stayed up nights running numbers, and accepted jobs no one else wanted. Some days I was exhausted enough to fall asleep on unfinished floor plans. Some nights I talked myself out of quitting by whispering reminders of the kid who once sewed her portfolio shut just to keep going. No one in my family asked what I was doing, not even in passing. Then one afternoon, while sitting in my dented Honda outside a renovation site, I received a forwarded article. The sender was someone I barely remembered from a networking event, someone who hadn't spoken to me in over a year. At first, I assumed it was spam. But when I opened the link, my breath stalled. Rookie developer turns rundown property into record-breaking penthouse project. My name sat directly beneath the headline. Bold. Unequivocal. Paired with a photo of the building I had poured the last year of my life into. The article detailed everything: valuation leaps, construction phases I barely survived, the projected revenue, the unexpected buzz. Messages flooded in within minutes. Old coworkers. Distant acquaintances. Even people who once ignored my emails. No one from my family. I stared out at the late afternoon sky, watching the clouds slide over the sun, as if the world itself was pausing to ask, "What now, Nora?" I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel victory. I felt stillness. Like I'd been running for years and hadn't realized it until the ground leveled out beneath me. Then my phone buzzed again. This time the name on the screen froze me. Dad. The message was short, exactly the kind of clipped command he used in business emails. Family dinner. 6 p.m. important discussion. No greeting. No congratulations. No recognition. Just expectation. Seconds later came another message. Don't be late. I held the phone loosely between my fingers, the weight of 8 quiet months settling on my bones. This wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't reconciliation. This was a summons, a meeting disguised as dinner. I inhaled the way I always had when preparing to walk into a room where my presence was more convenience than belonging. A slow breath in, an anchored breath out. Then I typed 3 words that felt like closing a chapter. I'll be there. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, restarted the engine, and watched the streetlights flicker awake as evening crept in. Whatever they wanted from me, they didn't realize they were too late. They were reaching for a version of me I'd already outgrown. I didn't drive to the dinner. Not yet. Instead, I went to the only place where my success actually lived, the one place no Hale had ever visited, my office. The building greeted me with its usual humming lights, comforting in their predictability. I set my stitched portfolio on the desk and opened it, the pages of contracts and plans whispering like steady breath. Every sheet in that folder existed because I fought for it alone. Not one of them belonged to my family. And inside that folder was something else, something they never expected, something that would turn that family dinner into a reckoning. My office always felt colder than it looked, plain walls, humming lights, the faint smell of ink and dust, but that night it felt like the safest place I knew. After my father's message, I needed walls that didn't listen, didn't judge, didn't expect. I needed the silence of fluorescent lights and the scratch of pen against paper. Those things, at least, had never failed me. I opened my portfolio, the one I had stitched by hand in that freezing studio years ago. The seam was still crooked, stubborn, and imperfect, exactly like the life that had grown around it. Inside, pages rustled softly, contracts, valuations, liens, permits, duplicates of checks I'd written to keep projects alive. Proof that I had built something with no one behind me, but my own shadow. I wasn't angry when I looked at those papers, not anymore. Anger belonged to the girl who wanted apologies. I wasn't her now. Now I was precise. My laptop screen glowed to life as I reviewed numbers, cross-checking totals out of habit. Payments closed in the next 6 weeks. Inspection reports. Consultant fees. Everything neat and contained. Nothing dependent on anyone named Hale. But beneath those documents, at the bottom of the portfolio, sat a packet thicker than the rest. The acquisition. 4 months of negotiations, countless site visits, and more emails than I could count. It was the single biggest purchase I'd ever made, a commercial plaza positioned in the heart of the redevelopment district. Anyone in real estate knew the location was a gold vein waiting to be tapped, including my father. Including Gerald, his longtime business partner. Including the entire development circle of the city. They'd been circling the property for months, like vultures waiting for it to hit the market. What they didn't know was that it already had. And I had bought it. I flipped through the pages again, letting the weight of each signature settle in my chest. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was simply mine. Earned quietly. Secured legally. Untouched by their entitlement. They wanted something from me. They just didn't realize yet that whatever leverage they thought they had was gone before they even texted me. At 7:19 p.m., I stood and walked to the window. The city lights shimmered across the glass, the world outside moving in soft amber stripes. My reflection hovered faintly in the pane, a woman who looked tired, yes, but also unbroken. A woman who had stitched her own life back together. My phone buzzed again. Not my father this time. A local news outlet wanting a quote. Then another. And another. The device trembled across the desk as though suddenly afraid of its own noise. I flipped it over and muted it. People suddenly wanting my attention was not the victory I'd once imagined. It felt irrelevant. The only thing relevant was the decision I'd already made, without realizing it. I picked up the acquisition file, slid it smoothly back into the portfolio, and pressed the flap closed with my palm. The soft click felt like sealing a vault. Whatever conversation my family planned, they weren't ready for mine. I grabbed the portfolio, left my coat hanging on the rack, and walked out. The hallway lights flicked off behind me like falling dominoes. My car waited outside, paint fading, engine faithful. I set the portfolio in the passenger seat, the stitched seam catching the streetlight. And then I drove toward a dinner that wasn't a reunion. It was a collision waiting to happen. They thought they were calling me in for money. What they didn't know was that I was bringing the one thing that could shatter their entire plan. My parents' neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had when I was a kid. Quiet, manicured, predictable. The kind of place where the air always felt a little too still, like even the wind understood it shouldn't disturb anything. As I turned onto their street, porch lights clicked on one by one, obedient and polite. It all felt rehearsed, like a scene they'd been living without me. I parked in the driveway at 6:59 p.m. Punctuality was the only language my father respected. Their windows glowed with that heavy golden light I'd grown up under, the kind that looked warm from the outside but felt like pressure the moment you stepped inside. Through the dining room window, I could make out silhouettes. Elena leaning forward, Ryan gesturing, my father pacing, Gerald adjusting something, probably his tie. They looked like they were preparing for a negotiation, not welcoming a daughter they hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. I stepped out of the car, portfolio in hand, blazer crisp. One deep breath in, one deliberate breath out. Whatever they expected from me tonight, they'd already lost the right to take. Before I could knock, the front door swung open. My father filled the frame, posture stiff, eyes scanning me the way he scanned investors, assessing usefulness, not emotion. "You're right on time," he said, stepping aside. No greeting, no embrace, not even a polite nod of acknowledgement. The dining room was staged like a meeting, plates untouched, tension hung like curtains. Elena sat tall with a glass of wine she didn't need. Ryan tapped the table impatiently. Gerald offered a too eager smile. My mother hovered behind her seat with the kind of nervousness people mistake for warmth. I took the open chair at the far end of the table, the one they'd left for me on purpose, strategically distant from the head of the table. My father didn't waste a second. "Let's get to it." Gerald leaned forward, folding his hands like he was about to present a pitch deck. "We've come across an incredible redevelopment opportunity, warehouse district. Fantastic projections. Strong land value. We're prepared to move," my father continued, "but the project requires additional capital." Elena chimed in with a patronizing smile. "It's really generous, honestly, that they're offering you a chance to be part of this." Ryan added with a smirk, "You get to learn from people who've been doing this longer than you." My mother placed a hand on my arm. "This is your chance to be part of something bigger, sweetheart. Bigger than me. Bigger than anything I'd done. Bigger than the penthouse that suddenly made them remember I existed." Not a single word of pride. Not a single apology. Not a single acknowledgement of 8 empty chairs. Just expectation. I set my portfolio on the table. The soft thump cut through the room like a dropped coin. "I did come for an important discussion," I said calmly. "Just not yours." My father frowned, already annoyed. "Nora, please. There's no time for..." I unlatched the portfolio. The rustle of papers grabbed the entire room's attention. Gerald's eyes narrowed. "Is that..." I slid the signed acquisition packet into the center of the table. Their world shifted in an instant, because the moment they saw what I'd placed in front of them, the room changed, and so did every single expression around that table. The moment the packet touched the tablecloth, the atmosphere snapped tight, like someone had sucked all the air from the room. Gerald leaned forward first, brow tightening, the way someone does when they see numbers they don't want to believe. Elena slowly lowered her wine glass, eyes fixed on the papers. Ryan stopped tapping the table. Even my mother's rehearsed smile faded. My father looked at me with the same expression he used when an assistant misplaced paperwork, disbelief tinted with irritation. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. I kept my tone even. "The commercial plaza in the redevelopment district." Elena scoffed lightly. "That property isn't even on the market." I met her eyes. "It was. 4 months ago." Gerald's fingers trembled as he flipped to the signature page. The muscles in his jaw twitched. "You bought it," he whispered. My father's face hardened. "You're telling me you acquired the anchor property for the entire district without mentioning it?" "No," I corrected softly. "I'm telling you I acquired it without needing you." Silence spread across the table. Heavy, unmoving, deeply earned. The warehouse district project, The one they gathered me here to pitch depended entirely on this plaza. Without it, they had nothing to secure investors with. No anchor, no approval, no leverage. Their entire plan had just collapsed, and they knew it. My father's voice cracked for the first time I'd ever heard. Why would you do this? You knew we were pursuing it. I closed the portfolio gently. Actually, I knew the city was pursuing it. And unlike you, I don't wait around hoping someone hands me an opportunity. Elena looked down at the table, her confidence evaporating. You could have told us, she murmured, but even she didn't sound convinced. Ryan muttered something under his breath, almost a curse, as he slumped back in his chair. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. Nora, we're supposed to be a family. A strange calm washed over me. A family, I repeated. A family shows up. My father stiffened. You don't need to bring up old things. Old things? I asked, eyebrows rising. You skipped the most important day of my life. You skipped months. You skipped every moment that mattered. Their eyes fell, one by one. The truth had weight. I stood slowly, gathering the documents back into my portfolio with the precision of someone who had already decided she was done explaining herself. You invited me here for my money, I said. But money doesn't fix what you broke. I fastened the portfolio shut. The soft click was louder than any argument. Dinner is yours, I said quietly. But the future, that's mine. For a moment, no one moved. Not even my father. They just sat there, silent for the first time in their lives, staring at the consequences of a daughter they had underestimated. I pushed my chair in, adjusted my blazer, and walked out. They didn't follow me. The cold air outside hit my skin like a wake-up call. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickering just slightly, the way it always had. I paused beside my car, letting the chill settle into my lungs. Inside the house, I could see shadows moving, frantic, panicked. But I couldn't hear a single word. That silence felt like freedom. My phone vibrated once on the passenger seat when I got inside. A message from my mother. We didn't know how to make things right. Please don't give up on us. I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I just turned the phone over, started the engine, and drove into the night. But the real ending wasn't waiting at their house. It was waiting for me at home, in the quiet I had built with my own hands. The drive home felt different this time. Familiar streets shrinking in the rearview mirror, the past losing its size with every passing mile. I drove past the corner store where Elena once made me wait outside in the cold while she showed off to friends. Past the park where Ryan bragged about being Dad's favorite. Past the hill that had always felt like a mountain when I walked it alone at 16. Tonight, none of it felt heavy. It all looked strangely small, like someone else's childhood memories left out in the rain too long. Downtown rose ahead of me, glowing with a steady certainty that felt nothing like the flickering warmth of my parents' house. My penthouse towered above the block, its glass catching the city lights like a quiet beacon. The doorman nodded as I walked through the lobby, but I barely registered him. My body was tired, but my mind felt startlingly clear. When I unlocked the door to my penthouse, the silence inside wrapped around me, not suffocating like before, but grounding. Not the silence of being ignored. The silence of finally choosing myself. I set my portfolio on the kitchen island. The stitched seam, the one I had sewn by hand during that freezing night in my first apartment, glinted faintly under the overhead lights. I traced a finger along it. That uneven stitch had held together through more than any person in my family ever had. Then I moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out beneath me, unapologetic, glittering honest. It didn't pretend to love me. It didn't pretend to hate me. It just existed, and so did I. The quiet in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass and exhaled. For the first time in years, the breath didn't shake on its way out. My phone buzzed again from the counter. Another message, probably from my mother. Maybe Elena. Maybe even my father. I didn't check. The days when their words dictated my worth were gone. I walked back to the portfolio, opening it slowly. The acquisition papers rested inside, neat, certain mine. I didn't feel guilt for what happened at dinner. I didn't feel triumphant either. What I felt was precision. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't payback. It was simply the result of what happens when someone stops waiting for people who never show up. I closed the folder, setting it aside. Growing up, I used to leave space for them everywhere. Extra seats, extra understanding, extra compassion. I used to believe that if I just earned enough success, enough goodness, enough responsibility, they might finally see me. But the truth was simpler. You can't make people value what they never bothered to notice. And you don't owe them the pieces of you they only want when the world starts clapping. I turned off the lights, letting the room fall into a soft darkness. The city outside still glowed, but inside it was calm. My calm. My home. My life. As I headed toward the bedroom, a small thought rose quietly, the kind of thought you don't realize is healing until you hear it out loud. Silence isn't what hurts. What hurts is who breaks it and who doesn't. What heals is who you become afterward. I paused at the doorway, letting that truth settle over me like a warm coat. If you've ever rebuilt yourself in the quiet left behind by people who were supposed to stay, if you've ever learned to stop begging for a seat at a table that only fed you crumbs, if you've ever stitched yourself back together and kept going, then you already know. Some stories don't begin when people show up. They begin the moment you stop waiting.